A good life is a life built around fulfilling work, play, relationships, and lifelong learning. Welcome to Good Life Conversations, where we explore the stories and strategies of inspiring everyday people who are striving to create a life of purpose, meaning, and connection. Hi there, welcome to this Good Life Conversation. My name is Jay. I am your host and the founder of Discover Year. And today's guest is Adam Mowrey. Adam is a client executive at a company called Marsh Canada Risk Advisory. Most of you probably don't know what that is, but Adam will take a second to explain it here in a few minutes. Welcome, Adam.
Thanks so much, Jay. Great to be here.
Okay, so Adam and I have known each other, I think it's been about 10 years, maybe 12 years, around the time I moved to Ottawa, and I think Adam had kind of moved back to Ottawa recently. And the first impression that I have of Adam was, in fact, we played hockey together. He joined our garage hockey league team. He's about 15 years younger than me. And I remember, as many hockey teams do, after the game, we were having a beer and chatting, and Adam was like 23, I think at the time, 22 maybe even, and I was so impressed by the way he was listening to me and others, and he was asking really intelligent questions, and he was engaged in conversation in a way that, having met thousands of young people, I had rarely met somebody, especially in that context, in athletic context. So I was really impressed by that, and Adam and I got to know each other more, and he worked at Escape Manor, who's a partner of ours to mentor you and Discover Year. And so we came to be friends, and then his experiences in work, his curiosity, his exploration, and the way he failed and recovered from those failures, I think were all really meaningful reasons why I wanted Adam to meet our students. So that's why we're here. He's been with Discover Your students for a number of years. And so, Adam, I'd love to talk a little bit about you and your pathway. But first, let's start with the same question as we always start with. Please help our students, our audience members, understand what a typical day looks like for you as what we might call a consultant at work. What time do you get up? Do you have morning routines? How many hours do you work in a day? How do you wind down your day? What time do you go to bed? Tell us a little bit about the flow of your day.
Yeah, sounds good. So I'd say I'm up between 6 and 6:45, and first activity on the docket is kind of have a coffee and stare into the void. I've always wanted to be that up right away and working out type of person, or reading an article, and I've come to realize I just need quiet time. And sometimes I take a walk down to the beach. Sometimes I just sit and stare at the wall and kind of get myself together, and it's a nice quiet way to start the day. And so that's worked well for me over the last couple of years as I've discovered that and played with different routines. Then I do like to either work in some exercise or get straight to work and kind of start the day early. So if I get a workout in the morning, typically I'm starting work around 9. And then if not, I'm trying to start around 7:38 and kind of get ahead of that, that 9 o'clock rush where meetings start and emails start to come in. And you probably hear this all the time, no day is the same, but I'll try and be as generic as possible. The roughly 8 to 10 hours in the day are spent between doing kind of analytical work, I'll say. So, my headphones are in, I'm on the computer working and, looking at numbers, trying to analyze information, pulling together kind of data from different sources, maybe into presentations, using PowerPoint, that sort of thing. Those presentations are, used to communicate ideas to our clients. Sometimes it's advice, sometimes it's a sales pitch, sometimes it's some sort of internal initiative. But I'd say 2 to 3 hours a day on average is spent doing that sort of analytical thinking type work. Another 2 to 3 hours is spent doing meetings and internal networking. So there's some collaboration that goes on within and across teams. Within my company, the sort of model is that I sit as a bit of a generalist, and then there are specialists that have deep sector expertise or deep product expertise in some of our various offerings. And so it's my job to sort of quarterback and draw on those experts to bring offerings together for our clients. So there's kind of a social component that way. And then, the other sort of hours of the day, are spent on a mix of things. Sometimes it's client-facing interactions. Sometimes it's internal social events, and sort of all those sort of small pieces and administration that might make up your day, expense reports, and personal project management, and just sort of getting your things in order. So I'll pause there, and if there's any questions, Jay, from you, and then I can go on to the evening if that's the next step.
Well, yeah. Why don't you so just to clarify, you said 8 to 10 hours. Is that does that mean that you work typically 8 to 10 hours in a day, or is that 8 to 10 hours from the time you start work until you kind of start to your bedtime process?
Yeah, so I'd say 8 to 10 hours is sort of the bookend of um when I start thinking about work to when I stop thinking about work on an average day. I am a big believer in kind of walks and lunch breaks. So I'd say there's probably two, a morning and an afternoon break of some kind, and like a good 45-minute lunch if it's feasible in the day. But yeah, I'm pretty disciplined with that. So I'd rather have a longer day with breaks than a shorter day without. That's my personal preference.
Yeah, great. So you break it up a little bit, you feel re-energized. So you might, be at work or in related things from 9 a.m. till, let's say, till 7 p.m. And then
Could be.
tell us a little bit about after that.
Yeah, so then if I didn't work out in the morning, that's when gym time happens. So typically my days end around 5 if I haven't worked out, because I've started a little bit earlier. So I'll try and go right to the gym or do some kind of either gym or social activity to kind of leave work in the rearview mirror. Mentally, I find that helps me. If I don't do anything in particular, I keep thinking about what I was working on that day, for better or worse. And yeah, so starting the wind down process either at 5 if I've started earlier, or around 6 or 7 if I've started a little bit later. And then I enjoy cooking for that reason as well. So between the gym, a social activity, and actually making dinner, I find it helps me just use my hands instead of my head a little bit, and start that wind down process. I eat, digest, and maybe go for a walk. And I'd say, in equal likelihoods, read a book, watch some TV, chat with my girlfriend, or kind of putter around the house, and do this or that. There's no structured bedtime routine, and try to get off the phone around 9:30, and in bed around 10:30.
Okay. Thank you. That's great.
No worries. I'm like, my life is mundane. I'm like, oh my God.
Well, I know, I appreciate you try to keep it as succinct, but of course we
Yeah,
know there might be events that you have, or birthdays
yeah,
or whatever
yeah.
in the evenings as well. So you're not boring, I
Yeah.
promise. Not from where I sit anyways. Thanks, Adam. I'd love to circle back to something you said about the being a morning person or not being the morning person who gets up and works out. Because a lot of our audience, and certainly our Discover Your students, are often grappling with this idea of like the way they should be. Like, I want to be the first person working out in the morning. I think I should be that, and they repeatedly find that that's not a natural thing, or it's difficult for them to do it. And then also you had this balance where it sounds like you still sometimes work out fairly early. It's just not the first thing. So like, tell us about how you discovered that. How did you come to understand and just be at peace with the fact that you're not going to work out as soon as you step foot on the ground out of bed?
Yeah, it's just it was that it felt miserable. And there was a point, like you say, where and on the other end of a workout, I would always kind of leave it feeling good, but the starting point, I was so miserable getting there, and it felt like such a slog. And it took probably a little too long to click that maybe I should just give myself some space to take a walk, and sort of ease into it, essentially. And that's just more for me. But it took many mornings of either miserably dragging myself to the gym, or being like, screw this, I'm not doing that. And I would have wasted kind of time and energy, like maybe getting ready. Oh, am I gonna do it? Oh, maybe not. And then you kind of don't do it, and you feel a bit guilty. So it's so nice to just give yourself permission to have that first bit of time, and then you have the expectation, like either you're gonna go as your next activity, or you're not. You're gonna go to work first, and that's cool. And you've blocked the gym later in your day. I do think exercise is important. I mean, there's a lot of pressure on people everywhere to be fit and all this kind of thing, and so that can be tough to grapple with. But for me, that actually is something I really value, and that helps me. Interestingly, if I booked something socially in advance in the morning, it's much more it's much easier for me to get out and go do that. So, that's another thing I've learned about myself. If I'm going to work out first thing, it better be with a friend. And so
Mm.
that helps me out.
Great. So you've been paying attention to the signals over, and it doesn't happen
Yeah.
overnight, but you've been paying attention, and eventually you got to the point where you said, "Hey, like, what I'm hearing some self-compassion, like, okay, let me let these ideas go. Let me stop being hard on myself for not being this way, and just kind of embrace, what feels right to me. And at the same time, I want to point to the fact that this is not kind of complete permissiveness. Like, you're still exercising the day. You believe that's important and you enjoy it. You're just kind of finding the routine. You're finding the map that works for you.
Yeah, and I love the word signals. That's something, I'm in my early 30s, and I really am only getting used to what it means to trusting my gut. And because it's my gut was something I had been very skeptical of, and wanted to be, hyper analytical in how I approach certain things. But yeah, those are important signals. So if something, really feels miserable, dig into why. And of course, throughout our lives, we have to do things that we don't like. And that can be true too. But if there's a pattern, it's worth looking into.
Yeah, great, thank you. And you're hitting on something that is a theme in these conversations, rightfully so. Part of our goal is to not to give the impression that life is overly simplified. And there's a quick answer here, an easy solution there. Life is complex. It takes thought and practice and mistakes. And it's useful, I think, for young people to hear that from people who are successful like you, who are still learning, but have found patterns and have taken time to figure these things out. So thank you. I'd love to know, it's not something that's come up in any of our podcasts to date anyways, and if it's possible for you to kind of quickly explain the idea of being a generalist at work, and you already kind of touched on it, versus a specialist. And my question really is for you, is that something that you identify with, being a generalist? How did you come to know that that's kind of what you want, at least right now? And it's just not something I think a lot of young people don't hear about. So what are the pros and cons of being a generalist? How does it work for you? Tell us a little bit about what that means.
Yeah, so I think being a generalist is wonderful. I'll give you like the business dictionary definition and then we'll unpack it. But I think in a business context, it's knowing enough about a variety of things to be able to bring your client value, without having to spend too much of your time or energy developing a specialty in any one of those things. And so often, in an advisory consulting capacity, I exist to bring advice or services to a client. And so there may be many areas of specialization that I need to bring to those clients. And so my job is to know enough about who I need to talk to and what questions I might need to ask, and how to articulate a client's problem properly to the right people who can actually provide the information to solve that problem. So being a generalist is having enough kind of range in your understanding of it, a given topic, to ask the right questions and kind of triage or direct, in a business context, let's say, a client's questions to that next step of getting those solved. And so I went through a period where I was feeling like, oh, should I develop an area of specialization, kind of in my late 20s, where I was feeling like I wasn't particularly good at anything. A great friend of mine recommended a book called Range, which is excellent, that I would recommend. And that made being a bit more of a generalist, having done many different jobs, feel empowering. And Jay, I saw your face light up there. It sounds like maybe the book Range.
I was wondering if you don't remember, I've recommended it to many people. I'm giving a presentation on that book and its ideas, the idea of
Wow.
prolonged exploration. So I just wondered if maybe it was me, but I guess it wasn't. It's one of my top 3 favorite books of all time.
No way. Maybe you endorsed it. It was Matt Jackowitz, who you may know. Anyway, great guy. So this made this feeling of, knowing a little bit about a lot of things, but knowing enough to be able to do something with that little bit. And so I think that's really the key to being a generalist. And I'm someone who is a bit impatient, very curious. I like learning. And so, those are just a few of my traits that lend well to being a generalist. And so, because I don't have the longest attention span, because I like to explore many different topics and connect with many different people, perhaps that doesn't lend as well to being a specialist and going deep into a given subject matter. But I think like the key is a good generalist can still bring value out of the little they do know, because they can ask the right questions and connect with the right people and know enough to understand, how to move a problem along towards a solution. It's a
Yeah.
little abstract, but yeah.
Yeah, it is a bit, but I mean, it makes obviously a lot of sense to me. And what I like about this is that you're a shining example of someone who, so many young people, for context, including students in Discovery Year, often have this idea of these very specific profiles or
Mm.
archetypes of what you can do in your career, what kind of job.
Mm-hmm.
And they're often, I think, thinking, okay, well, I love the arts, I want to do something in the arts, or they're thinking, I'm really good at this thing, I'm going to go do that, or this is the company I want to work for. And I think you're a great example of what's true for at least some percentage of the population, which is the things that you're interested in could be interesting in a lot of different places.
Mm-hmm.
And where you have landed, in my opinion, you can tell us what you think, but where you've landed in this idea of risk management consulting and sales, it could be just about anywhere. Is it fair to say, like, there's a lot of industries that where you could have landed and used your traits and the skills that you've developed in a way that would be kind of almost perhaps equally meaningful to you?
Yes, absolutely. And it does take time. And so, if you're just coming out of high school and you don't feel you have this sort of collection of experiences to draw on, that's okay. But I feel so, my collection of what really is, sort of random mishmash of jobs now feels like an empowering sort of well to draw on that I could channel towards many different experiences. So in this case, my first job working at a sports stadium, I was in the guest services department, and client service is critical to being a consultant. And so I got to draw on that fact. I also was a leader of teams in that area. So I got to draw on that piece. I was a bit more analytical and entrepreneurial in my next job, which is great for a company that supports those types of ideas. So I get to talk about that. And so, but there are many different experiences in, each of my past jobs and other, chapters of my life that could have been channeled into many different places. It's just that this opportunity, I was able to paint a picture of why, my experiences made sense here. But
Mm.
it feels empowering that I could go tell a different story somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. I think it's an important message. It's a complicated world, right? How we decide what to do for work and to earn a living, and there's a lot of mixed messages out there. But I think it's important for young people to understand that sometimes what you're looking for is not a company, it's not a job, it's not an industry. It's kind
Mm-hmm.
of the nature of the role that you have and the people that you work with. Those are really important factors.
Yes.
And you mentioned, things that I would name about you too. You're someone who obviously loves to learn, and you like to ask questions and meet people and analyze things. Those things are
Mm-hmm.
pretty apparent to me. And I'm curious if you wouldn't mind just for a couple of minutes talking. I mean, of course, you have other traits as well, but I think those are pretty central to what I see in you and what allows you to be successful. So, how did those things come to be? How did you come to know that there are traits and skills that you have? Have you always known? Tell us a little bit about how you kind of came to know about these things or develop them.
Yeah, I mean it's a combination of things. Part of it takes time, but when I think really quickly, um, it's I don't know if everyone's as lucky to kind of have people like you in their lives, but there's you are someone who's kind of a sounding board, who is interested in talking about these things. And so there are you and people like you in my life who have mentioned things like this. So it's actually picking up on signals about what people remark about me. It's when I think about my past experiences in school or at work, what pieces of my day make me light up and feel excited and feel like they're kind of filling my cup as opposed to draining my batteries. And so those experiences tend to align with some of the traits that you've mentioned. There's more structured reflections that I've done. I did a master's program, and the first kind of couple of weeks had nothing to do with the subject matter of the course. It was really about sort of self-reflection and self-discovery. So I'll call that like a more structured reflection, and figuring out what you like as opposed to just kind of organically thinking about it. And you know one of the biggest pieces as well is when, in things like job interviews or networking, it's the stories that I feel most comfortable telling about myself, you know, why I'd be a good fit, or, where I'm strong. Those come the most naturally when I'm talking about the topics that you mentioned. And so there's something there, right? There's some sort of authenticity piece that, the sum of all those different things, kind of leads me to agree with you. In those are things I value and enjoy.
Thank you. One of the elements of this book range that you mentioned, which I would publicly recommend to anybody, students, parents, educators. I think it's a really well done book with a lot of validity. One of the ideas in that book is the importance of short-term planning, and that's something that I have tried to promote myself for many years with young people and their parents. So I'd love for you to, if you can, tell us a little bit about. So you worked at this sports organization where you helped organize and coordinate large events, sporting events. Then you worked at Escape Manor where you did a lot of marketing and analytics, to help the company, target the right clients, that kind of thing. And then you went into, you did your master's in business administration. Then you went to consulting. So all these things, I'd love for you to kind of help our audience understand, like, how did you make the decisions that you did about where to go, and why did you take what is, to many people, probably seemingly a bit of a random, a somewhat random assortment of jobs?
Yeah, absolutely. So, starting with the sports entertainment job, I think that was a bit of a, that first move actually was, potentially a rash one. It turned out to be a good decision, much like many bad decisions do. But it was my first experience actually feeling, job dissatisfaction, because it was my first job out of university after a few years of having a really great time. I was experiencing some job dissatisfaction, and the founder of Escape Manor was one of the founders of Escape Manor was my former manager. And so I had a conversation with him about some of my, challenges with my current role and some of the things that I was looking for in a new role and what I thought I might be able to bring to the table, in his context. And so, because I had that conversation, I was presented with an interesting offer, might I like to move and actually try kind of a new role. And so, really in that moment, actually what I should have done is brought that news to the leadership team at the stadium and had a conversation, and had a difficult conversation to say, hey, I'm thinking about leaving. These are the reasons why. What can we do to potentially solve this? But given that I was kind of, a bit more inexperienced at the time, I just sort of, pulled the parachute and moved on, and it ended up being a good decision. But I mentioned that sort of oversight because I think work can be a really frustrating experience for people at all levels throughout their careers. And so it's, always try and have that tough conversation. If you're not satisfied in your job first, don't just run away. That's the reason I wanted to highlight that. But I moved to Escape Manor in a much more entrepreneurial culture where I'm empowered to sort of, run with projects and sort of build my career path in, a direction that suits me. It was a time of kind of big growth for the company. And at the 2-year point, I started to again feel a little bit like, maybe, I'm looking for something new. But that time I was much more intentional in my decision making. And actually through a Discover Year workshop, I had met with someone who was in the consulting business. And it sounded like all day, every day, what they did was work with companies on their most challenging problems. And they worked in a project format and worked with many different companies. And once a project was done, they could move on to the next. And I was like, perfect. I have a short-ish attention span. I love delivering value. I love creating and building and changing things. So consulting is probably the place for me. And I started to sort of try and apply to a few consulting firms, and was getting met with the resistance that I didn't really have a business degree or a business background, and having an MBA would be a real asset. And so that's something I had been considering anyway. So I decided to go on and pursue my master's. And with that same thread of being interested in consulting, on the other end of my master's, I joined a consulting firm. But in the sort of vein of short-term planning, I told myself that at the 18-ish month mark, because consulting kind of works in 2-year cycles, and then you either get promoted or leave, I would start to prospect and look into other roles. And so I started networking with a number of different companies, thinking about what could I take from consulting that I liked, the client facing aspect, the fact that I work with many different companies, the fact that it's very analytical, high performing culture, and move that and get some of the things that I wasn't getting. So business development, a little bit more freedom to carve my own path. Those are things that I wasn't getting in my consulting role. And so at sort of the 2-year mark, after about 6 months of networking with a number of different companies, I was presented with an offer to stay at the consulting firm and move into the next level. Or, I just so happened in sort of the same couple of weeks to be presented with an offer to move and do a role that, where the leadership team believed I could sort of carve my own path a little bit more and get some of those things that I was missing. And so I decided to take that opportunity. So, it has nothing, one thing I haven't really touched on is industry or company size, or there's all these sort of intangibles that are can be important but weren't as important to me. And I was looking for certain things, and I think prioritizing those things were, that was helpful for doing that 2-year kind of short-ish term planning, but structured enough that I wasn't just fleeing my job because it wasn't satisfying to me at any given time. It was more considered, and I learned from that first experience when I probably left a little too soon the stadium job, just because there were a few things that I wasn't happy with.
Sounds like you're articulating something that we do spend a good deal of time on, and some of our other mentors highlight as well, which is this idea that, again, there's a complexity to it. Number one, you were thoughtful and intentional and reflective on what you wanted, and you obviously did a really good job. I know that for a fact wherever you went. So you're someone who cares about doing great work, and you would do that regardless of where you were. But you were also thoughtful, like, what do I enjoy about this? What do I enjoy less? And so you made some of your decisions based on those reflections. And at the same time, there were these happenstance opportunities and events that came along that we would never have predicted probably.
Mm-hmm.
And you also took those into consideration. And I think that's just important to highlight, because it's easy on, a 30-second snippet on social media for someone to imagine, okay, like, I know what I want, I'm going to make it happen. Here's step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's exactly how I plan it. Or it's also possible to think, geez, I have no control over anything that's going to happen in my life. Let me just go with it. And your story, I think, is a nice blend of those two truths.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that. And I think it's so important to understand that, if you're networking for a job, you don't know which coffee is going to be the one that leads to the right path. You just know that you should, I just know that I should probably have a few. And from those few, there's going to be some that sort of those sparks fizzle out and it's clearly the wrong path. And some are going to open up new doors. And so trusting the process is, something I've really come to appreciate, because you never know. I wouldn't be at the company that I'm at now had I not made friends with someone who I met at McGill. But my plan was kind of the same, whether I went to that school or a different school. And so, it takes kind of the circumstances to shape your path a little, but you have to have your eye on going in a certain direction at the same time.
Yeah. And we're saying all this in a conversation here, and perhaps it might appear that this was all kind of easy and totally cerebral for you. And I know that that's not true basically for anybody, but I know, because we've had conversations, that there were tough decisions for you, and these things weren't obvious. I think that's important to highlight as well.
No, for sure. And that we're glossing over the many moments of doubt and indecision, and starting down one path and actually then turning around and pursuing another one. And that's all part of the process too.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. We could chat for a while, I think, about these topics. I'd love to turn into, though, a different channel here and ask you a little bit about your hobby. So we didn't mention this earlier, but Adam lives in Vancouver right now at time of this filming, and he moved there with a lot of intention. He's not from Vancouver. And so I think that relates to the hobbies, a lot of the hobbies that you like. So tell us a little bit about maybe why you wanted to move to Vancouver, and what are some of the things you do for fun?
Yeah, so there was I found myself kind of visiting Vancouver every summer for the 5 years before I ended up moving. And I've been here for 2 years now. And so that ability to live in kind of a world-class international city, but then have access to, really world-class nature, is the balance that I was looking for at this point in my life. So, the perfect month to me is kind of two weekends in the mountains, 2 weekends in the city. And so in the winter, that's a lot of skiing or, camping in the areas where there's not as much snow. And, biking and all those sort of outdoor activities. I love getting out and experiencing, the BC nature. It's phenomenal. But I also love, going to restaurants and breweries. I went to go see a play last Friday. It was amazing, and compared to some of the other cities in Canada, Vancouver's not the leader in arts and culture, but when you think about, it's kind of like the 10 out of 10 nature city and maybe a 7 out of 10 metropolitan city otherwise. The overall the sort of average is pretty fantastic compared to what else is available in Canada. And so that the sum of those two things really meet my needs, because I'm sort of that 50-50 type of person, where I love to be outside, and I also love to enjoy all the good things the city has to offer. And we were talking about career stuff. It's also got a fairly major business center. Now, mind you, that the sectors are really more towards natural resources, real estate, and there's some more dominant sectors here as opposed to, let's say, Toronto, which is a bit more kind of all inclusive when it comes to business segments. But you can have a good challenging business career here. You can experience world-class nature summer and winter, and have access to a pretty solid city. So yeah, between those things, it made sense to me.
Very cool. And yeah, before we started recording, we were also chatting about cost of living in Vancouver, and you have to be living under a rock to kind of not understand how in Toronto, same thing. Many cities now, but Vancouver and Toronto are often highlighted as being almost unachievable in terms of having an affordability of cost of living. So again, I just want to highlight the complexity. Adam and I were talking about how much he adores the lifestyle in Vancouver, and there's many elements. And at the same time, he's also thinking about, how far a dollar goes in Vancouver.
Yep.
And those are considerations, right? There's a trade-off. There always is.
Yeah. Totally.
Okay. Thanks, Adam. There's many other questions I'd love to ask you, but I guess it'll perhaps be for another time. But I'd love for you to just explain to us. So you're someone who did an undergraduate degree in university. You went back to college for a college diploma, and then you did a master's in business administration. So you've sampled the waters of a lot of different kind of styles of learning. And for the people out there that are kind of grappling with, university or college, or, what's the best thing for me? Do you have any advice, generally speaking, from your experiences across those three different schools, three different levels of education? Tell us a little bit about, what you took out of each of those, or if you have any kind of general advice for people when they're trying to figure out what type of schooling might be good for them.
Yeah, sounds good. So I mean, no experience was devoid of value, but the sort of like return on investment, let's say, and I don't just mean financial, I mean time as well. It for me was really, it came from, in order of biggest to least, was the MBA was the biggest value for sure, because I was extremely considered in what I wanted to do. I fully committed myself to that experience. And I really thought about, not only do I want to pursue this degree, but where do I want to pursue this degree? And I had the benefit of 6 or 7 years in the workforce before that, and life experience before that. But it was immensely helpful because it was so considered. The college diploma was really the result of kind of coming out of my undergrad feeling like I didn't have any actionable skills. And so what I felt like college did so well, and this is Algonquin College in Ottawa, and I've heard this, across many of my friends, is it was very action oriented. So coming out of an undergraduate degree that was, it was an arts degree, it was pretty abstract. I didn't have a lot of actionable skills. It really got me ready for the workforce fast. So it didn't go into great depth, but it gave me the minimum I needed to actually market myself to employers and be of value kind of the next day. And so college is fantastic if you have an idea of what you want to do and you want to kind of get to doing it faster. Typically those degree programs or diploma programs are shorter. They're very action oriented. Algonquin and I imagine other colleges has an exceptional employer network because they know that it produces people who can kind of step into work the next day. But the limitation is there was a lack of depth and sort of deep specialization, at least in that program for me. So I'm sure you could explore that, but broadly I think the win with college is, if you want to try something now, do it, go into it, and then maybe think about what master's degree you might want to do later, or what have you. For me, the undergrad degree, was really an exercise in learning my independence. My mother was a professor, and she had basically the ability to get a deal on tuition no matter which school I went to in Canada because of her union or something to this effect. And so I was pushed very, very hard out of high school to get my undergraduate degree before this, really, really subsidized tuition opportunity ran out. And so I didn't consider what I wanted to do. I sped through my 4 years of undergrad just trying to, meet the goal of getting a diploma or, a degree, and really left feeling like I had wasted my time and squandered this kind of wonderful opportunity that many people would have loved to have. And so I think though, having met many undergrads since then who have actually considered what they wanted to do, taken a gap year or not, but many who have, and really thought hard, or maybe perhaps pivoted their major throughout school and taken an extra year and done it in 5 years. Those people came out of undergrad with a huge amount of value. And so I didn't feel I captured that value from an undergrad degree. And so to me, my ideal path would have been to take a year or two to figure out what I wanted to do, and then do a Bachelor of Commerce. And then I don't think I would have ever had to go back to school again. But such is life. You learn lessons, because that business degree was phenomenal. I engaged in everything. It was stimulating. It was socially stimulating and intellectually stimulating. The undergrad can be that, but you kind of have to consider what you want because there's so many options. So, and if it is an arts degree, go for it, but know that that's what you want to do, and think about what you might, build on that with later, so you don't enter the workforce, feeling unequipped.
When people often ask, as you can imagine, the question to me about who should do a discovery year or a gap year in general, and my reaction is, I think a lot of people could benefit from it. Even people that are ready to go to university or college could still benefit from it. Mm-hmm. That said, if a person comes to me and says, I am so excited about learning mechanical engineering, or I really want to explore business, I want to understand finance, it's pretty visible to someone like me to see that person's excited. And that's mm-hmm. number one. Interest is number one. So for any audience members out there, think about that. Are you really interested? Is your child really interested in learning? Or are they going because it's the next step? That's mm-hmm. almost all you really need to know in some sense before you make the decision. So good advice. Thanks, Adam. That was a really nice characterization of those three experiences. And I'd love for you to leave us, if you'd be open to it, with some advice. So we call these good life conversations. The emphasis is on building a life that's filled with meaning and purpose and satisfaction, not simply pursuing a title or money or status or what you think other people want. It's really about creating a life that's emotionally, psychologically fulfilling. So with that context and the consideration that so many young people look out into the world on their phones or their tablets, whatever it may be, and see a world that seems perfect and everyone else is living the dream. What advice would you share with, young people today who are moving into the adult world? What would you share with them about your ideas on how to eventually achieve a good life?
Yeah, so this is the words are going to be cliche, but let's unpack them for a second. I think it's listening to your gut and those signals that we talked about earlier in the conversation. So, your body viscerally is sending you signals, and our brain, I think, is infinitely more intuitive than we could ever really understand. And so those sort of implicit signals we get when we're thinking about a certain path or thinking about a certain job or having a certain conversation, if it really isn't feeling right, give that feeling some credit. But my ask of you is not just to listen to your gut and act. It's to take that feeling that you're the signal is giving you or your gut's giving you, and validate that with 1 to 3 people that you trust. So for me, someone who when I was getting different signals about where I should go to my master's, Jay is actually one of the people I called, and he was kind enough to give me his time for what seems like maybe hours of this indecisive guy kind of bothering him, but as I look back, but I knew that my gut was telling me certain things about where I wanted to go, but I didn't really know quite how to interpret those feelings. So listen to your gut and take a step back and have that conversation about your next steps with some people you trust, because If you just listen to your gut on your own, sometimes you're just a sounding board with yourself, and that's not enough.
That's great advice. I think, yeah, make use of and be intentional. It sounds like what you're saying also is be intentional about who those people are that you choose, and learn what people give you, what kind of feedback, and grow from that. And maybe don't be shy to try someone else if you're not
Yeah,
getting
absolutely.
useful
Yeah, no,
feedback.
and well, I mean, it's so important. Your best friend actually, might be perfect as your best friend, but not the perfect person to give you this advice. So someone who can be unbiased and, does have your best interest at heart, but isn't going to be shy to give you some, tough news. That's important too.
One thing we do talk a bit about, at least I feel like we talk a bit about in the program, is learning to pick up on the signals that you're describing. And this is, it's murky. It's difficult sometimes for people to comprehend what we're talking about, and to pay attention to the signal and what's the signal versus what's anxiety or fear. So I just want to layer that in here, because I think that's a really important skill that I don't know if you feel like you learned that or if it was more intuitive to you, but it's often the case that people can let their emotions take over, and that overrides what might otherwise be a useful gut feeling. In other words, say it's too hard, or I can't do it, or they have self-doubt. So that is different. I just want to highlight from listening to the signals and learning how to interpret the signals.
Yeah, no, and that's still a process that's ongoing. And the reason I said check it with someone is because sometimes when you're saying something out loud, you realize, oh, I'm just actually scared, and I've had that experience when I've been gut checking certain things, and really good thought partners will also challenge you and say, it sounds like, you might just be scared of failing, or something to this effect, right?
Yeah.
So no, it's not, I don't have it mastered. And that's why building in that check is so important.
That's great. I'm taking away from this a lot of things. Two main things, though, is this idea of being a generalist, and for perhaps young people listening to explore, is that something that is interesting to me, rather than perhaps never knowing that that was a thing, and thinking about the combination of traits and skills that might be useful to become a generalist, and there are many in the world. And then this idea of being intentional and also being open to the signals that you're encountering, and the people that you're meeting. So thanks, Adam. That was I would love to ask you so many more questions, but I'm sure the students will benefit greatly and enjoy meeting you at the Discovery Day. And to all the other audience members, thanks for listening in. Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Okay, this has been another Good Life conversation. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you'll tune in to the next one.